Can you go to jail for naming your baby? That sounds insane, and the truth is that you probably won't serve hard time no matter what you write in the blank on your child's birth certificate. However, you might be surprised to find out that there are absolutely some things that are off limits when it comes to names. You might think nothing is off limits if Gwyneth Paltrow can name her kid Apple, or famed magician Penn Jillette could name his kid Moxie Crime Fighter. It turns out that you can get pretty weird, you just can't break the rules. Now, what are those rules? Well, let's dig in. One of the first rules is length. In the United States, the legal length of a baby name can vary according to the state. In places like Kentucky and Florida, there are no limitations to the number of letters that can be in a name. But in other places, they have limitations based on things like computer systems. Massachusetts, for instance, limits you to a total of 40 characters across all of your names, first, middle, and last. So if you have a really long last name, it doesn't leave many letters to work with for your first two. Another rule involves the use of characters that are not letters. That means no punctuations or symbols, or even numeric digits. So you could name your daughter Janice, but you can't replace the A with an @ symbol or put an exclamation point where the I is supposed to be. One of the reasons for that is because of the issue of pronunciation. While it's hard enough to properly pronounce some words when they're only using English letters, imagine how confusing it gets if you throw in punctuation and symbols as well. And the same goes for emojis. Don't try to name your child Francis Poop Emoji Lightning Bolt, or the court will reject it. You also can't use letters from an alphabet from a language foreign to your country, at least not in the United States. For example, there are completely different letters in the Arabic alphabet or the Cyrillic alphabet that Russians use. The same goes for Hebrew and Greek alphabets. There are many languages that don't use English characters, and you can't use any of them in a name in the United States because they don't have a specific use or meaning in English. One very famous case of a celebrity running into this problem was when Elon Musk and Grimes tried to name their child this. What does it mean? Well, it would take too long to share the absurd explanation the two of them gave for it, but this much is certain. California said no to it. The letter X is a perfectly fine name. In fact, he named his child and his social media platform the same thing. But the other two characters aren't English letters, and they weren't eligible to put on a birth certificate. Eventually, they settled on whatever this is. It really rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? So those are the rules about what can go into a name. But what about the names themselves? What words do the government consider off limits for naming a child? And most of the words that are off limits are related to some kind of controversy or taboo. For instance, in many states, you're not allowed to name your child Jesus Christ. Not only is he a notable religious figure that many people hold sacred, but the name also is sometimes used as an expletive. However, it doesn't always stop at just Jesus. Back in 2013, a Tennessee judge ruled that a couple was not allowed to name their child Messiah. She said that Messiah was a name that should only be reserved for Jesus, and she told them to change it to Martin. Now, if you think that sounds like something a judge shouldn't be deciding, you aren't alone. A few months later, that judge was fired, and the ruling was overturned. On the other side of the spectrum from Jesus is Adolf Hitler. Most states and countries have rules forbidding the naming of your child after notorious people who have committed atrocities like genocide. That exact thing happened in New Jersey in 2009. A man named all three of his children strange and deeply offensive names referencing famous Nazis and white supremacist beliefs. Not only were the children's names eventually changed, but the kids were taken into state custody. Guess how they found out about the name? It was because the father had gone to a bakery requesting a cake that said "Happy Birthday, Adolf Hitler." And of course, the only party worse than Hitler is the devil himself, which is why in 2017, in the town of Kassel, Germany, the local government would not allow a couple to name their son Lucifer. The couple decided to go with the less diabolically inspired Lucian to solve the problem. And speaking of offensive things, another thing you can't do is use vulgarity in names. Things like curse words, offensive derogatory terms, and obscenity are not allowed in names. Now, I'm not going to list those words and get this video demonetized, but it's safe to say that if it's a word that you're not allowed to say on regular nighttime television, it's probably not something you can name your child either. And some places are more strict than others, too. In the scheme of things, the United States is actually more forgiving than places like Sweden or France. In Sweden, they really don't like product placement and famous references in their baby naming. Names like IKEA and Elvis are very controversial, and they will often be rejected. In 2008, parents tried to name their child Lego after the toy block company, and Swedish courts told them they couldn't do it. The parents did appeal, however, and they were allowed to name their son Lego, so a win for freedom and for those parents, but maybe not so much for the kid who would almost certainly get beaten up more in school. But no country has said no to more names than France. And sometimes that's probably for good reason, like in the 2017 case of parents who wanted to name their child Jihad. The reason that's controversial is because that is an Arabic word whose most common definition is a struggle or fight against the enemies of Islam. Now, there's obviously some loaded political and religious issues there. The authorities said it wasn't an appropriate name, and the parents continued to pursue it. It eventually escalated to a court case. Other times, it's possible that maybe France is just being too sensitive. In 2015, a couple in northern France wanted to name their daughter Nutella. Nutella is the peanut butter-like spread that's made from hazelnuts and cocoa. A French judge was not a fan of that, and he said they couldn't use it. But he decided to meet them halfway, and he ordered the girl's name changed to Ella, the last half of their chosen name and the part that's a little less weird. And then there was the time that France said no to Marseille. Now, Marseille is a famously beautiful oceanside city in southern France, and the French are quite proud of it for obvious reasons. But when a couple in 2017 tried to give their child the middle name Marseille, the court said no way. Like I said, France is pretty strict. In 2015, they told a couple that they weren't allowed to name their child Prince William. And when the parents settled on their backup name, Minnie Cooper, the court rejected that one too. Geez, France, maybe mellow out a little bit, huh? But perhaps the most interesting baby names considered against the law are the ones where the reason isn't very clear. For instance, in Switzerland, the court said no to a couple who wanted the middle name J for their daughter. But keep in mind, it wasn't the name J, it was literally just the letter J. The court said it was not acceptable, even though it was a middle name, which is the one that most people either don't use or abbreviate with a single letter anyway. For example, beloved US President Harry S. Truman didn't actually have a full middle name either. It was just S. But I guess Switzerland knows better. Or how about the time in 1999 when courts in New Zealand ordered that a child's custody be taken from her parents so her name could be changed? And the name? Tallulah Does the Hula from Hawaii. Now here's the interesting part. The name doesn't break any specific rules in New Zealand regarding naming your children. But in this case, the daughter was embarrassed by the name and didn't want to be known by it. So the court ended up changing the name, but they kept the new name out of the public, so no one could connect the girl with the new name to the old, embarrassing one. And that verdict probably only happened because the victim of the naming was a child who didn't like the name. The name is otherwise legal. And the proof of that is that in 2010, an adult man in New Zealand lost a bet with a friend, and the loser of the bet had to change his name. So his new name is Full Metal Havoc, more sexy and intelligent than Spock and all the superheroes combined with Frost Nova. And since it meets the requirement of being no more than 100 letters, that is now his legal name. So what did we learn today? That you can't name your baby after famous people if they're too good or too bad? That France doesn't put up with naming shenanigans? Yes, but more than that, we learned that some parents have a terrible sense of humor, and if the court didn't stop them from naming their child something as a stupid joke, no one would. That's it for this episode of No Way That's Legal. If you want more fun and fascinating looks into the legal world, be sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.